Hey everyone, I'm Sarah Gloss and welcome to another episode of A Bro's Guide to Glitter. Today we'll be discussing ballet. My guest and I will go through its history and origin as a masculine art form, talk about our personal experience taking ballet classes, and compare it to other forms of dance. Today, my guest is a really awesome guy I met in the musical theater department at NYU. Freshman year, we were in a scene together for acting class where he cheated on me with a goat, and he's currently diving into method acting at the Strasberg Theater and Film Institute, and he's got wicked DJ skills. Please meet Maanav Goyal.
Hey.
Hey, Maanav. So today is the day before Halloween, and we were talking about it a bit before the podcast, but would you like to tell the listeners who you're dressing up as for Halloween?
Yes, actually I had a couple outfits. So yesterday I was Marty McFly. Got a whole red puffer jacket and everything, so that was fun. And then tonight I'm going as sexy Indiana Jones.
So you're just going full 80s.
Oh, for sure. 80s costumes are the easiest because half my wardrobe is just like 80s stuff.
Makes sense. So, we'll talk about like individual relationships with taking ballet and dance classes later, but do you remember when you first experienced dance, like maybe watching a musical or movie?
Yeah. I remember like when I was really little for school, we'd have like field trips. I think that was the first time I really like saw a theater. I really saw like a ballet, even if like we would stay for like half an hour. Honestly, I found it boring. Not gonna lie, like dance, it always just seemed like, okay, this is something some people do. More classical styles like ballet didn't really speak to me. And then being Indian, like dance is so much of our culture. But again, It always felt like something very distant for me. Like I'll never forget in 5th grade. So I went to my uncle's wedding, and at the reception, everyone's dancing, and I just refused to get up. And then like one of my cousins was like, "Look, you dancing it's not about the dance at all. It's just about having fun and celebrating and being social. Like, don't worry about how you look. Don't worry about any of it. Just do it." And yeah, I remember that being one of the most fun nights of my life once I finally got out there. But like even so, like I don't know, dance has always felt distant from me. And I'll never understand why. Even as I continue to take dance classes and all that, there's always been that distance.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, I kind of feel that too. Like when people say, oh, I'm an actor first, I'm a this first, I'm a that first. Like that notion of what are you first always forces me to say dancer third or dancer last. And even when I am taking dance classes and enjoying dance and doing well at it in that scenario, it's very hardcore. And especially with ballet that is so, I don't want to say rigid, but it's disciplined. And there's vocabulary and there's technique that, it's hard.
Yeah. I think ballet, just because it's also really codified, just seems like it's the same way like classical music, I think, reads to our current generation, where fine, people like it. I'm sure there's a reason people appreciate it, but it doesn't necessarily speak to me immediately. I think, or like really any classical art form, like even like when you go to the Met and you're looking at these old Renaissance paintings and you're like, all right, it's cool, it looks nice, but like I like the stuff at the MoMA a little bit more. It just speaks to me more because it feels more current. And I think ballet inherently, because of its deep history, which we'll eventually get into,
yes,
just has so much distance because it is so old and almost archaic in that way.
Yeah. It is interesting how I think that same thing with the lingo, the vocabulary, it's hard to master, and especially because I think that not all the image of good technique is placed on certain bodies. And so if you don't see yourself in that body, it's hard to embrace it then. And also this idea that ballet teachers put on you, which is that if you own the technique, it'll like set your art form free. But then it takes so much time to master that before being able to set your art form free. And I like how you compare it to, you know, Renaissance paintings and just like classical art in general, because I mean, times change and art forms evolve, and I'm sure ballets, you know, I know they're making new ballets every day and modern ballets, but we definitely have this image of ballet that is stuck in the 1800s.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So, can you tell us about your progression through the arts and into theater? Where did you start singing or acting?
Yeah, so it all started in middle school. So, I mean, the story I love to tell is, you know, when I was really little, you know, I was always exposed to so much art and media and, you know, television and movies and theater. And, like, even, like, on those little school field trips where we would go see some play, or I remember, you know, in third grade, the high school, so I was in India at the time, and the high school was doing Peter Pan. And, like, I don't know, it was so magical. And I was like, all right. And also, like, I don't know, I have main character syndrome. I was like, oh, I want to be the person right there, which everyone sees. But the problem was when I was really little, like, I was lazy, you know, and I always wanted to tell these really great stories, but I was afraid of putting the work into it. And, you know, like, it came, I think, into form in different ways. Like, you know, whether it was, like, oh, I'm going to make Minecraft videos, and, like, I had this whole idea for, like, this massive, like, epic series that's going to be, like, the next Lord of the Rings, but in Minecraft. Well, of course that didn't happen. To even, like, you know, I wanted to get into photography or filmmaking, but I was like, I didn't, you know, I would let things like, oh, I don't have a good camera as being the reason to not do something, which is, like, that's not an excuse, because that's purely a lack of drive, right? People make amazing things with, you know, their mom's iPhone camera or a little point and click. So it was all on me on that one. And, you know, finally my parents were like, all right, Maanav, like, you can't just be doing nothing all the time. Get into something. So in 7th grade, they made me do the school play. They said, okay, they're doing Annie at the time. And they said, Maanav, like, just audition, even if you're, like, painting trees or something. Just do it, right? And then I ended up getting the lead, and I fell in love with theater, and that was the whole thing.
You were Daddy Warbucks?
Yes, I was the Daddy Warbucks.
How was the bald cap?
Well, here's the thing. So, you know, early on, the director, like, so it was double cast. The director told me and my friend who was the other Daddy Warbucks, you're going to have to shave your head. And we were like, no, that's not happening. Like, I like my hair too much. I can't do that. What if it never grows back? And she was like, well, you know, when I've done the show in the past, like, they've always shaved their head. And throughout, we're like, no, we're not shaving our head. And then finally, and I was growing my hair out, you know, in 7th. It looked horrible, but, you know, that's what I was just doing in 7th grade. Because I hated getting haircuts in elementary school. I mean, even now, I still keep my hair long. But I remember at some point, she was like, look, even if you want to do this bald cap thing, you're going to have to cut your hair, because you need to have short hair to put a bald cap on. Like, we don't have the nice wig cap and everything that we can totally tighten it up and make sure it fits. Like, you're going to have to get a haircut. So then I remember that next day, or no, it was the day after my 12th birthday. No, 13th birthday. The day after my 13th birthday, my mom takes me to the hair cuttery, and we get a full buzz cut, you know, number 4 all around. It looked horrible. It looked like a porcupine. And then I remember then we had our first tech rehearsal, like, immediately after. It was that Saturday. And I remember going there, and the director was trying to figure out the ball cap. It rips. And then she's like, all right, we're not going to do the ball cap. We'll just color your hair gray. And I was like, wow, I got this horrible haircut for no reason. And yes, I didn't use a bald cap, but I now look like Obama in all the pictures.
That's hilarious. That's funny how you went from, you know, your parents being like, hey, dude, you're sitting around too much, do something. And now you're like a drama major at NYU.
Yeah, I think, well, also, like, you know, when I was really, really little, like, you know, my parents did put me in, you know, music classes, like piano. Because also when I was a kid, I was a very energetic kid. The problem was, like, you know, in class, like, I would talk really loud. I just naturally had a really loud voice. And then I would talk a lot. I was the kid, who the teacher would say, "Okay, move your desk next to mine. You can't talk. You can't sit in a group right now."
Aw.
I was that guy. Just because, like, I don't know, I love talking to people. I like getting a reaction out of people. So that was always
Yeah.
there. And then I remember my first grade teacher was like, "Look, this energy, have them channel it into piano." So when I was in first grade, my parents got me a keyboard. They put me in piano lessons with one of my mom's friends. And I did that, like, on and off throughout elementary school. And even, like, when I moved to India, like, we got a piano teacher there. But I never really practiced, so I didn't really get good at it. But I think that's what got me into music. And there was a time where, when I was experimenting with all the different ways to, create that magnum opus that will fulfill my need to create an epic piece of art, I did try music at one point, and that was something I think now has continued to carry on. But I would make like these giant like orchestral scores, and I would go in FL Studio and try to produce music to either like put in my Minecraft videos or just have like I would put them on like Bandcamp, and they were horrible orchestral
Yeah.
songs that sucked, but like I did it, and so I think I did have that creative artistic sense in with music, and then I think that carried then into me doing musical theater where in fifth grade we all had to do choir. That was just in elementary school, you had to do choir.
Yeah.
And like I did it, like it was fine, like cool. I think that the reason I stayed doing it was because like my fifth grade crush was like in the choir, and I was like, she stood right across from me, so I was like, all right, I can stare at her the whole time.
Well, that's
and
what
then,
my
like,
uncle did, and he married her, so there you go.
I don't think I'm gonna marry this girl, but I have not spoken to her since sixth grade. But yeah, and then sixth grade, when you get to middle school, they say you have to either take band or orchestra, choir, or like arts rotation, which is like painting and cooking. So I was like, all right, I don't want to learn a new instrument, so let me do choir. Let me just keep it up. And I enjoyed it. I remember like that was the first time where like we would have like parts in music, like tenor, soprano, alto. And I
Yeah.
remember the first time we had a song where like, oh, all the other voice parts drop out. It's just the tenor sing like literally a measure. Like what me and my friend we would always do is like we'd drop our music on purpose. We're like, oh, we have to go pick it up right now. We can't sing this alone. So I mean, like just I was always scared of it. And then I remember it was the end of sixth grade. For English class, we were doing little Shakespeare scenes. And
Okay.
I remember we were allowed to invite our parents. So, I mean, nobody invited their parents. But one girl did. She invited her mom and her grandma. And they came and sat in the class that day, and we did our Shakespeare scenes. And I remember afterwards, like, the mom came to me and said, hey, I'm actually the choreographer for the elementary or the middle school's musicals. You're not a bad actor. Like, you have a really good voice, a good energy. Like, hey, you should do it. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do it. But then, like, I told my mom about that, and she was like, all right, like, maybe you should. So I remember that summer, my choir teacher at the time, he, like, does a little summer camp, like a 1-week summer camp, which is like a little music camp where, you learn a little solo, and then you work on it throughout the week, and at the end of the week, you perform it in a little concert. So I was like, so my mom was like, all right, Maanav, like, no say no to doing, you're going to do a solo. Like, doesn't matter what it is, just get out there, do it. And I was so scared. And I think I did Gary, Indiana from The Music Man.
Oh, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Really crappy song, but like, yeah, so that was like my first ever solo. And yeah, I remember doing that, and I was so freaked out. But like afterwards, like, I remember like there was like some high schoolers there, like I think they're like interning for the choir director or something. And like I remember they came up to me and was like, Maanav, like, you're not bad. Like, like this is actually pretty good. And I think those were the first seeds that kind of got planted that then led me to agreeing with my parents, like, okay, I'll do the musical. Just because, like, all right, I did something, I worked on something, and people liked it.
Yeah.
And I think then when I finally did end up doing Annie, that was the first time where, I'd work on something for 3 months, and then I got to do it in front of people, and, there's reactions out there. Like, I remember, seeing my aunt in the audience just so overwhelmed. I remember my uncle, like, nodding his head and just so proud, when I came out for bows. I remember my dad, like, legitimately afterwards being like, hey, I'm proud of you. I think you can do, plays from now on. You should. And then, yeah, and then I kept it up. And then I remember in 8th grade, we did You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. And I was Linus in that. And I think that was the show where like, I really learned to just fall in love with art and music and everything to the most full extreme, where I really just played with it. Like with Linus, like I wanted to be Charlie Brown, but I got Linus. So I was like, oh, this seems boring. Like he doesn't have the big, Schroeder's like numbers, or he doesn't have the touching Charlie Brown moments. Like he's just kind of there in the show. So I was like, all right, how do I really just make this the most fun experience for myself? So I really just played with everything as much as possible. And I remember like again, that opening night, after the show, like first and first, like people went crazy. Like I remember after my number, My Blanket and Me, where Linus like dances blankets, and then at the end, like everyone has blankets, and it's a big dance number. And I thought it was just gonna be some small number in the show, but like it ended up being like the show-stopping number, which usually isn't the case with that song. Usually it's Beethoven
Yeah.
Day. But yeah, like it just ended up being the show-stopping number, and I was just like so overwhelmed, like wow, this feels amazing. And then I remember like me and my dad were walking to the parking lot after the show. Okay, time to go home. And a group of high schoolers who came to see the show, who were like alumni of the middle school, like stopped me. And they're like, "Manav, you were so good." And like and it's like, oh, all these like really pretty like senior girls are giving me a hug right now. Like, this is crazy. I'm gonna do this for the rest of my life. And yeah, the rest is history.
Yeah. It's funny how, like, the, validation and the applause, like, like you're saying, from an early age, to the little, hey, like, actually, you are good, really just drives you.
Well, I think so much of being an artist is, with me personally, is like, especially because I do want to do more commercial work, I think, in my career. Like, I get the thing of like, okay, I want to do art, purely for the sense of making art, which is fine. And I think it's completely valid, and I really respect people that are in that position that they can do that. But with me, like, my goal is how do I integrate, doing things I'm really passionate about, but also in a way that's like commercially viable.
Yeah, make money.
Not make money, and also reach a larger audience. If I'm gonna make a movie, I don't want to make it some art house thing like 20 people are going to see. I want it to be, as close to an A-list thing as possible, so that 1 billion people can see it, and it could actually make a bigger impact.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, but then when you're doing any commercially viable thing, the unfortunate thing, but the real thing is like it has to appease to people, and you need to have validation in that sense. So I think that seed was kind of always there then when I was a kid. Because even so, like when I was making these Minecraft videos, my idea was not, oh, I'm making them for myself, I enjoy it. Like it was no, like I want to make the next thing that gets 1 million views and becomes like the next, I don't even remember, like Charlie is so cool, like, or something crazy like that. Just some big YouTuber like that. I want to be like that. I didn't want to be a small little nobody YouTuber that only gets 200 views. I was just, I don't know, I've always had that drive. I want to make the biggest thing possible because I really want to affect as many people as possible, because I think it comes down to the central thing of, even when I was a kid sitting in, math class, just babbling on for hours and hours about who knows what, it was purely just like get a reaction out of people, right? It was just because I wanted to control room and make people feel happy and entertained. So I think it's just one giant through line.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Even with this podcast, like, obviously I'm having fun with this podcast, and like I don't want to like monetize it or anything. Like that would take away the fun for me. Like this is purely for fun, but still, like you're saying, I am thinking about like the specific people who will be listening to it, and I do want more of my friends and family to listen to it, so I do have like that audience and that audience validation in mind.
Yeah, I think audience validation is inherently part of being an artist, right? Because if you want to be an artist as a career, that means you have to put your work out there.
Yeah.
And putting your work out there is a game of validation. Because I don't think the artist who consistently gets negative reviews on their work is going to necessarily keep it up for the rest of their life, right? There comes a point where you're like, all right, if nobody is into this, then maybe I should keep it to myself. It's human nature, I think, which does suck, but I think but then it's the thing of like, well, people find their audience no matter what. Fine, maybe the mainstream masses won't be into this, but I'll find that right person, I'll find the current zeitgeist that really, fits in with this moment and make it fit in. Because I don't think humans as a species want to do things for nothing. Everything we do has some purpose, some gain of going forward, because we have this existential thing in life. I don't know if it's a societal thing or just purely animalistic nature of we want our lives to matter in some regards.
Yeah. So let's play a word association game.
Let's do it.
I'm going to put 15 seconds on the clock, and in those 15 seconds, you're going to say every word that comes to your mind when you think of ballet. You ready?
Okay. Let's do it.
Go.
Plie, tights, pirouette, figure, form, arms, muscles, early in the morning, en bas, arabesque,
Ding, ding, ding.
Okay.
When you said early in the morning, I felt that. For the listeners, Maanav and I were in the same ballet class freshman year of college, and it was at 9 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
Very brutal.
Very, very brutal.
So let's dive into the history. So, ballet started during the Italian Renaissance and flourished at the French courts. It was a practice mainly for men of royalty and nobility to show off their poise, which was a sign of their status and good breeding, and display their wealth with ornate and elaborate costumes. The wealthier you were, the more money you spent on private ballet tutors. Ballet reached its height under the rule of Louis XIV, who started the Royal Dance Academy in 1661 and the Paris Opera Ballet in 1672. There were non-royal students who entered the academy to train specially for ballet around that time, a little bit after it opened, and 1681 was the first year that those students graced the stage, who were non-nobles. So, can you think of any equivalent today where men dress up and go through a ritual maybe to show themselves off?
Ooh. I mean, I feel like men are always doing that, you know? Like, I feel like that's my day-to-day of just like, all right, let me get some drip on, and then when I go outside, I'm going to have to feel like a boss, you know, you just got to do it. But I think, you know, just listening to that little history, I feel like there's also a lot of tie to just hip-hop culture there. Right, where you put on this facade or character, because no rapper, no hip hop artist, no hip hop dancer or anything is generally carrying that energy like in their day to day. Like, I think one of the classic examples is Tupac. If you like see him as he is like day to day, like there's an interview of him when he was in high school, you know, and famous things like, you know, when he was in high school, he took ballet, he went to performing arts school in Baltimore. And when you hear that guy, you're like, oh, this does not seem like a gangster rapper, right? Like, he is very, very mellow. And I think, you know, but then there's the thing of like when we go into hip hop mode, there's not necessarily a facade, or I would say a facade, or a mask, you say, which kind of, it works in the scene, and it is to celebrate, you know, this energy and this power and this culture. But it is not how you are necessarily day to day. Even the people that live and breathe hip hop, when they're performing, they are a different person than they are when they're speaking. And I think that's just part of the fun of it, is that you got to do that, right? And, you know, another thing that's coming to mind is drag. You know, that's another case where, right, men go ahead, they put on these elaborate costumes, you know, completely change their entire image, you know, go with a different name, and then do these stunning performances to really express themselves. And I think that really ties into what ballet's history is.
Yeah. Well, and what you're saying about like rap and hip hop, I was thinking to myself, you know, do men today have poise? Which, like, because for them, they have this, in the Renaissance, the idea was poise of, oh, light and delicate, and we're good breeding, so we're going to take small steps. But today, like, men still have a sense of, like, this idea of swag, you know, and sure, you know, there's this image that boys aren't poiseful, they're, you know, they're whatever, they're gross, they're not really caring about their comportment, but like swag is real, and you can see a guy walk into a room and be like, okay, does he have swag, or does he have kind of this comportment, or is he insecure about himself? So like, tell me about your relationship with like swag and male poise.
Yeah, I mean, I think male poise is absolutely real, and I think right now, actually in our age of TikTok, you can really, really see that, right? The way an e-boy carries himself on TikTok is it's a certain poise, right? There's a certain way where they, you know, they keep their jawline a little flexed, right? They do all that, right? They you know, mug a certain way. I think that's poise. That really is. And then I think with, you know, more typical swag that comes from hip hop culture, I think, yeah, it's definitely a type of poise and way of carrying yourself that fine isn't very proper and still, but also I think that just comes from like, I think that proper and stillness comes from also like the fashion of the time, which was very rigid clothing. But now it is, oversized. It's a little swingy, right? There's a little feel with it. And I mean, I know growing up, this whole concept of how I carry myself in a room was always something I was kind of at odds with, because part of me wanted to never be seen and heard, right? Because we as humans enjoy a little anonymity. But I think as I, aged, and I think through puberty and stuff, and I wanted to be, I guess, every person hits their mating ritual age, right? We're like, okay, I want to be noticed by everyone in the room right now. And you start to find, well, how do I carry myself? And I think even now, like, I don't know if it's just because I'm an actor or something, but I do find myself bouncing between, like, different ways I carry myself. The way I'll go to a party, if I know I'm dripped up and I know, okay, there's cute girls there and, like, I'm about to make some moves tonight, like, I know I'm going to carry myself differently versus, like, all right, I'm just walking down the street to class and I don't feel like talking to anyone and, oh, it's rainy and it's cold and I just want to be ignored right now.
Yeah.
There is a clear thing, but I think, that's all poise right there. And I think even, the old Italian and French nobility, when they weren't always carrying themselves in their most proper, robotic, rigid way. That's just how they would in public-facing events because that showed power.
Yeah.
But I guarantee, right, when the king is watching, the jester perform and he's sitting in his throne like this, just totally like it's a different poise, right? And it shows a different type of power and it shows a sense of, all right, you're here for me now, right? Versus like when I'm in king mode and I'm, putting a royal decree, I'm here for the people and I control the people. So I think that's always been there. And in the case of then, modern swag, it is the same thing where it's very situational. I don't think that any person carries the same swag always. Because you can't. Then you're just going to be stuck in this one. Because I think the way you poise yourself also naturally changes your emotion at the time, right? The current state of being, your state of mind, right? I mean, I think through acting training, we know that more than anything, that how you physicalize yourself affects you. So I think to some extent, like, nobody has one natural poise. I think we all have a wallet full of it, and we pick what we need at certain times.
Yeah, and certainly I think that when we look back on poise in the 17th century context, like, we really only have access to those ideas for the upper class, whereas today, I mean, there's different poises in different communities, and whereas, one might walk into a room differently in my house, they might walk into, a room in your house differently, just because we're, like, have our own places in the country and our family has different upbringings. And so, that's another thing. So, moving into the Romanticism era. So it's in the 1800s when women really start dominating ballet, and this is in line with 19th century European Romanticism. And this is where we get ballets like the Nutcracker and Swan Lake, and a lot of these plots involve spirit-like women who seduce men in their magical or fake state, like Giselle or Coppelia, and a lot of these women are very emotional and kill themselves for their lover or die of a weak heart. And we're not going to dive into the plots of any of these ballets, but the seemingly romantic structure that paints these women as soft and delicate takes on an erotic tone for all the male spectators who get to see 40 women on stage all at once in their tights and short skirts. Because despite ballet still being considered high art, their costumes were very risque for the repressed Victorian era. And the thing about a lot of these girls is a lot of them were extremely poor. And they came from either the streets or really poor families. And because they spent all their time training at the academy from a really young age, they didn't have any time to work and make money. And so this is where the male benefactors come in. So older, wealthy men who went to see the ballet would start relationships with these girls in training, sometimes and often as young as 14 years old, to both financially support them and to vouch for their favor with the casting directors and the choreographers, who, by the way, all the casting directors, choreographers, directors, composers, etc., they were all men. The teachers, the only ones who were women, really, were the dancers themselves. And, of course, all these girls traded this support for sexual favors. So the Paris Opera Ballet ran on these men's money. And the Opera Garnier, which is the Paris Opera House, was built with a special entrance for these men, and rooms where the ballet dancers warmed up were designed for these men to meet with them. Because, like, a regular warm-up room for dancers in a dance studio today would probably be like, doesn't really matter what it looks like. It's backstage. It's for the performers. It has dance floors. It's small. But no, the warm-up room in this opera house was, like, giant. Could hold lots of people. Was luxurious. Had chairs for these men to sit. And while there were some dancers who managed to get by without a benefactor, few rose to stardom without one. And in fact, the dancers' mothers would help facilitate these relationships. And this is why famous dancers at the time had popular fame similar to that of courtesans, which are basically like high-class prostitutes. So we can say a lot has changed. However, it should be noted that one Jeffrey Epstein spent a lot of his early days hanging around the American Ballet Theater.
Oh.
Yeah. So, what are your thoughts on all that?
I mean, wow, that was a lot. I mean, I think going back, the whole thing of seeing these very succubus type women, right? That was kind of the role that they were always put into. I think it fits even with our current stupid narrative of, like the manic pixie dream girl. Right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It really is. Where, okay, we're so happy. And, even now, I think the reason, anime and, there's the whole waifu culture, right? It's the exact same thing of, okay, I can have, 40 girls that fit this very specific look and this very specific attitude. And it still appeals, weirdly, to a lot of young guys. Sorry to any listener that is into waifu culture. It's a little weird, guys. I'm sorry. But, I don't know. So I think, we definitely consistently see... I don't think things have changed, right? I think they've just taken new forms and in very different ways. Fine, now you won't have men, going to the ballet and then sticking around, stage door and saying, hey, why don't you come back with me to a room? That's fine. That's not happening now. But then you have things like how contemporary sex work is, right? With OnlyFans, where it's like, all right, I saw your TikToks. I think you're pretty hot. I'm going to go pay you some money so that I can see more of you, right?
Yeah.
Which is, yes, it's valid work, and yes, you have to do what you have to do. But there is something to be said about then the men that are, propagating this culture. And there's no denying that a lot of it is very, very creepy. Especially with then our, fucked up idealism of these very young women, right? I mean, even OnlyFans girls, people, you're never going to see older. Most OnlyFans girls are, in their late teens, early 20s, right?
Yeah.
There is this tendency of, preferring younger. You don't see as many OnlyFans artists that are, in their 30s or older. Which is a little different, I think, than in the porn industry, where you'll tend to see a little bit older bodies. So I do think, that through line is there consistently. And then what you're saying about Jeffrey Epstein, I think that really speaks to it of, fine to some extent, okay, it's changed where, now a lot of it is digital and it is, more in media and art versus, stage dance. But you still see it where, okay, people like Jeffrey Epstein, who you can tie a giant, knot to, or, trail to, going back to them, these nobilities and these weird, power structures where it's pretty disgusting, right? And I think that him showing up at that ballet theater is no surprise at all, right? Because not only, okay, fine, knowing what he has done and in his whole circle and all that very screwed up stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no then denying then, yeah, people in power, they naturally tend to do these things, right? And we've seen that within, I think, this whole Epstein thing and the whole, hashtag Me Too movement has brought a lot of light to where these people who are in high power will go toward these young girls in a lot of times artistic spaces, right? We see it a lot of times where a lot of child actors are groomed, right?
Yeah.
Why specifically child act? I think there's the thing of like also they're an artist, and that dynamic. Okay, I'm a struggling artist, or I'm trying to make my way in an industry that is very unforgiving, and then anyone with power, they can easily abuse that, even if they're not even in that industry, right? And we'll see that all the time with Wall Street people doing these type of things. So I think
there's the whole joke in 30 Rock where the girl gets off the bus and sings the I'm gonna be a little actor bit from Annie, and she turns to Tina Fey and goes, "Hey, do you know where a young prostitute like me can get started?" And this idea that a struggling female artist basically doesn't have any other skills and has to sell her body, which is just a terrible image to propagate.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a narrative that unfortunately continues. And even now, in TikTok culture, ignoring, how their OnlyFans might be linked in their bio, there's a thing of well, no, you have to some extent sexualize yourself, right? There's almost an expectation of that. And if you don't, the comments will, take care of it for you. Or you'll find a subreddit about you that sexualizes you on someone else's behalf, right? So I think there is this forced requirement of, if you are a woman trying to make it in any artistic space, any creative space, sexualization and the abuse of sexualization is almost becoming inherent, which is such a deep problem. And the question is, how can you even get out of it? Because as we now know, or as we've known, it's been going on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Is there an escape, or is it going to be just constantly just changing forms until, kind of making itself undetectable for a moment until we have these larger conversations, be wait a minute, this is all the same thing right now.
Yeah. And how do you think, as a male artist and performer, how do you think that system, do you think that hurts men in any way? I mean, obviously it does in some extent, but tell me your thoughts. Do you worry do you worry about yourself becoming a victim, or are you thinking about, I don't know, give me your thoughts.
I don't know if I'm ever concerned about myself becoming a victim, and I think that just comes from this massive male privilege of we don't have to worry about these things as often. I do know people where it has happened to them, men who have been taken advantage of in these type of situations, in these creative spaces where, okay, you're my director or choreographer, and I'm going to let you take advantage of me because there is that terrible power dynamic that unfortunately encourages that. But for me personally, I don't know if I've had that fear, which I'm very privileged to say. Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of, especially, straight guys in the industry, we have this added privilege of we typically don't have to worry about these things, right? I think with LGBTQ artists in the industry, there's a little bit more concern there, especially, for gay men and trans men. I think that's a larger concern. Yeah. And I don't know. I think things going forward can change because the people in power hopefully will change. I think, hoping that our current generation is being raised in the proper way, and the next, generation of directors and choreographers hopefully aren't using their power in such shitty ways. We'll find out, I guess, in our careers, which is so scary to think about. But I don't know. We can only hope that all these conversations Gen Z has been having are making sure that these issues can be brought out of the way, and that, we always blame it oh, it's just a creepy old man. Well, one day we're going to be are we going to be the creepy old man?
Yeah,
It's on us to make sure we're not. So you better not let that happen. And then you better not get to a point when, you're like 80 or, wherever, even if you're in your 50s or 40s or whatever, being like, oh, I'm old. I can do these things. And anyway, and not feel, and maybe even to some extent feeling like, oh, it's owed to me because that's just how the industry is. And
Yeah.
me being in this power, it's an expectation. That's a terrible concept that potentially could be the case. And I don't know. So I'm kind of almost interested to some extent of like the current generation of creepy old men. Why are they creepy, right? Why do they do these things? And I think we also don't take the time to ask them why. We say, don't do that for completely valid reasons. But what is the reason why, right? What do they feel is owed to them? Is it purely a white privilege thing or a male privilege thing that they just feel owed to them? Or is it something deeper? And then, a lot of times there's the case of like someone who was abused goes on to become an abuser later on because of, how they internalize it. So then there's also the fear of like, we're seeing it more, especially in the LGBTQ community, of there is this abuse going on. Well, how to make sure then, going forth that it doesn't get internalized in an unsafe way that leads to this being a further issue, in the next 20, 30 years.
Yeah. And it is interesting how I think that a lot of the shift in why these systems of power continue to like abuse people is like this weird connection between money and sex. And these guys in the ballet, they were able to have access to these women because of their money and because of their social status. Obviously, like, they paid for the season tickets to always go to the shows, and they were funding the shows and they were funding the ballet. And so then when they went up to these women and were like, hey, you're cute, no one's going to stop them because they're paying for the whole thing.
Yeah.
And even like today, like think about the Iron Man movies. I do love Iron Man, but especially in the first two movies, and yes, he like his whole thing is he becomes a better person, but I think his real change and becoming a better person exists beyond the first three Iron Man movies. But but in those, he is really rich, and so then he gets to have sex with a lot of hot women, including that reporter who really didn't like him. Yeah. And so there's, and then of course in the, tabloids, we hear all about Elon Musk's threesome with Cara Delevingne and Amber Heard, and you're like, how did that happen? And there's this notion, it's like, well, they're rich, they get to do that. And so for, today with like Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein, like, yeah, they both are wealthy, but even on a minuter level, just like I think that's seen in media and that's seen as a standard of like, okay, you've reached this level, therefore you deserve that. And even if people don't have the idea of, well, I am at this level, I am the boss, I have this much, I deserve it, I think that when you're on a high of, being in charge of your life and like being used to telling people to do stuff and you get it, you don't expect people to tell you no.
Well, also I think, a lot of the sex work industry has, is built on the knowledge of that money and sex are so tied together.
Yeah.
And I think, partially, we see it now where like with OnlyFans where, people, they have money, right? They have the leisure income that they can say, okay, no, I want to spend it on something that is in sexual nature, right?
Yeah.
Fine, it might not be the same as, hiring a prostitute, but it is okay, I have money and I'm willing, the transaction is, hey, I'm funding your life in exchange for, your feed pics, your nudes, wherever it is. So I think it's there, and we are very cognizant of it, especially the industry that is built on sex and money being, a real transaction, which it is. But I think, there's a lot of concerns to be had of, there is that sense of once you have money that, oh, I am owed women. It is.
Yeah.
a very disgusting mindset, but you see it all the time. And, people, a lot of straight men do equate, their power with, my ability to pull women, have sex with women. Right? I think, the whole idea of an alpha male, a Chad, right, is someone who has also a lot of sex, is able to get any girl they want. And straight men, we idolize that, right? We say, oh, I want to be like that one day. And part of it, I think, fine, is the human nature thing of, like, okay, we are attracted to someone, and yes, we want to have sex for pleasure because it makes it feels good, and that's a whole, study right there. Mm-hmm. But I think on the other hand, it's the thing of, well, as people, if we should step back and be like, all right, is this something we value to the point where we're willing to break these things that generally probably feel wrong? I mean, I've never, used OnlyFans or, bought anything like that, but, like,
yeah,
I can imagine to some extent you must feel like, okay, this does feel a little bit wrong. Like, I'm using my money for this very, I don't know. And then, like, even, like, with waifu culture, as I was bashing on earlier, like, the thing of, like, okay, I'm going to buy this $200 doll that I'm going to have, sit on my desk. Like, you got to feel a little bit like, all right, is it worth the $200 to have plastic anime boobies on my desk? Like, I don't know. It's strange.
Yeah, good point. So, with the fact that the 1800s is now when you have, females dominating ballet, I thought that was interesting considering in theater, theater is notoriously female dominated nowadays. Obviously even with like the program we both were in for the last 2 years, it was like 2/3, a little more than 2/3 girls and a little under 1/3 guys. And we still have this idea that, there are male directors and male writers that really dominate that area. And of course, it's a constant struggle. We're also trying to get more like non-binary, gender fluid, trans people, obviously like more gender balance everywhere. But that still seems to be the case of a lot of female performers and male director writers. So has your experience as a straight man in theater, do you find yourself empowered by being one of the few male performers, or do you find yourself like driven to the roles where like men like notably get famous, like writer, director? Tell me about your experience with that gender balance.
Yeah, I mean, it is always a weird thing because, like, of course I'm all for, more demographic diversity in these type of roles, and I think I have a thing of like, I'm never like, oh, I can't wait to be, a male director, right, or a male writer, right? My thing's like, no, I want to be an Indian director, writer, for these. That's kind of how I justify it to myself as well. It's more of an ethnic thing. It's I'm a pioneer in the sense that, okay, I'm doing it for this group of people. But then, of course, the argument to be made, well, Maanav, what about the female or the trans or the non-binary Indian director, writer, or whatever? And to that, like, of course, there's a thing of like, of course, I'd love to, have them take my place, but. But then also there's the selfish thing of like, well, I have my stories that I want to tell too, right? And I think that's just in any position of power. Of course, there's always going to be someone better for it. And it's the thing of, well, I think it's the thing of knowing, well, okay, you might not necessarily be the best person for it, but then how can you use whatever power or position you have in the most efficient way possible and the most beneficial way possible? Because fine, it's not my place to tell a story about, a trans Indian person because that's not my experience. Yeah. But if I have the ability to, if I have the funding to, I can at least make sure that story can be told by the right people. So I think that's more of a drive I have is any power I do gain, I do want to use it in the most, not noble, I don't feel like noble is the right word, but the most correct way possible because that's what the world needs right now.
And of course, with all of the white, writers before, the more Indian writers and directors, the better.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, and I'm talking Indian because it's my experience, but, with really any demographic group, like that exists, or any diasporic group that exists. But then I think, from the side of like, being an actor, like I have found, it has been easier in some regards by being, one of the few men in the room. And then the added thing of, okay, I'm one of the few Indian men in the room. And you just got to hope then whoever that person in power is says, hey, that's something that stands out and we want that. So it is kind of a thing, I get to kind of I've been on both sides of the table, where I've had things where, I'll have, it doesn't matter if, they're men or women, but they're white, right? And because of them, I was like, oh, I really hope this white person is not like, oh, he's Indian, we don't want him.
Yeah.
So that exists to some extent, but, then I think that, I remember I had my whole, like, freaking out moment in high school, like, wait, why am I doing this? Like, can I do this as a career? Like, being an Indian, like, is this a good idea? And, people always say, like, oh, why are you the only Indian dude in Tisch? Like, yeah, there is a little concern there. But then it's the hope of, like, all right, as the future goes on, hoping that there is that correctness and nobility within or not nobility is not the right word necessarily, but, like, people are a little bit more attuned to the current moment in making sure that, I'm supported in any artistic endeavor I have. So I think that's more my drive than, oh, I'm a man, and that gives me some benefit. I mean, definitely there was a point, like, I do remember, when I first started doing theater, like, that was one thing I learned very quickly is, oh, man, if you're more likely to get the lead role because, there's only 4 guys versus 30 girls. So you walk into that room is going to be an easier experience for you. And it still is, even as I continue to age and as the pool of male actors I'm competing against gets larger, it still is overwhelmingly easy for me, which sucks. And I'm very lucky that I have the added benefit of, being a person of color. I guess there is some privilege there in that to some extent. But that's also at the thing of like, well, white privilege can only take you so far for some people. And that's something I'm hoping to challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. Very well said. Very well said.
Thank you.
So let's talk about our personal experiences taking ballet and dance classes. So when did you take your first dance class, and what type of dance was it?
Yeah. Trying to think. Well, I mean, like, I guess there's like, in like 5th grade when for some reason you have a square dance unit in gym. I remember that being a thing. Or actually, no, I remember in 3rd grade, so when I was in India, so the school I went to the American Embassy School in New Delhi, and what they do every year is for the entire elementary school, they'll put on this giant, like, production. So I remember, so you start doing that when I think you're in 3rd grade. Second, 1st grade, I think you're still too young to handle the responsibility of putting a production on. So it's like a total devised piece of basically what you worked on in your gym class, in your music class, and in your art classes, and they just come together and make this giant devised piece that's, like 3 hours long, and it's like really grand and beautiful. So I remember like when I was in 2nd grade there, the theme they did, it was on the 5 Chinese elements.
Okay.
So like they just did this giant, I mean, it's like you wouldn't expect kids to like, put on something that is very abstract and profound. Like, how do you physicalize metal in music and dance? And it was very awesome. So for the year I did it, they were actually going on, the theme was music as art as dance as music. So like basically how do you find these intersections? So I guess, like I remember like when early in that process, like, we went to gym class one day and said, okay, we're gonna work on ballet today. So I remember what he did, he put up I don't know the artist that made this. You know how at the Met, there's that one room and they have like the statues of like the little ballet dancer girl, and she's like holding like different.
Yes, it's by Degas.
Yeah, so those Degas sculptures. So I remember he put a picture of that up, and he said, okay, everyone try to fit this form. How does it make you feel, right? So it's just a really profound question to ask, a bunch of 8-year-olds, but like, how does it make me feel? And like holding these positions and tightening my muscles in that way. So it's really interesting. So I think that was like my first taste of experience with ballet. But then, once I got into theater, I always sucked at dancing. I was really, really bad. And it got to a point, like, I remember, so I didn't have to dance too much in middle school. Like, that was, like, easy. Like, okay, box steps, and, like, everyone did it fine. And then I remember in high school, we were doing The Little Mermaid. And I remember, so I was in the ensemble during Under the Sea, and for some reason they put me in the front of the line. I don't know why. And I was horrible, and I was really, really struggling with it. I remember during Tech Week, like, the director brought in, whatever, a guest judge or whatever to help us out and give us notes. And I remember after that rehearsal, like, when he was giving notes in front of everyone, he said, you suck at dancing.
Oh.
And I remember, like, why would you say that? Like, dude, like, come on. But, like, I know. Like, so, whatever. Like, I had that, and I remember, like, I would do the show, and, like, I hated it. I remember they made us wear, like, these, like, starfish costumes were, like, basically giant bodysuits. So, like, I was already, like, really uncomfortable with, like, okay, jiggling in this, like, and everyone's seeing me do this, and I can't dance, and it's just, it was horrible. And, like, after that, like, I knew the director was like, all right, we're never going to make Maanav dance again. Like, I remember, like, when we did In the Heights, right, which is a show filled with so much, dance. Like, she said, okay, specifically, like, okay, Maanav is not going to dance. He's the only character in the entire show that is not going to do any dances, right?
I
so, like, they did stuff like that.
cried if I was in that position.
I mean, but also at the same time, I was like, all right. I kind of said, I was like, well, look, I'm still a good actor and I'm a good singer. Fine, I don't need to be good at dance. That's okay. I don't need to be a triple threat or anything like that. Like, fine, who cares? So I was okay with it, but, like, of course, part of me was like, okay, I really want to learn. I want to get better. But then I was, like, accepted, like, all right, if I go to college for musical theater, I'll learn then. So I didn't really dance at all in high school. And, like, even, like, dancing with friends, like, just kind of freestyle dancing, like, I always stood out. I wasn't really good at it. I was really shy about it. I didn't have the same, like, swagger and finesse the same way my friends would, where they would just be able to pick up a move and just roll with it and really just vibe to it. I couldn't do that. I really struggled with it. It's honestly a skill I didn't gain until the last couple months, and I thank honestly my dance training at school for that. But so in senior year of high school, so for a lot of universities, there's a dance call.
Yeah, I was about to say, because when I was in high school, people were like, parents of other people who went to college for musical theater was like, Sarah needs to take ballet. Sarah needs to be the best ballerina. The fact that Sarah doesn't do ballet is going to ruin her.
No,
Did
exactly.
you get that?
Yeah, I mean, all the time. People were like, well, Maanav, like, you're not going to be able to do this if you just can't dance. Simple as that, right? And legitimate concern, but I was like, okay, well, I'll just really work on my singing and acting and making sure, like, that takes care of it. And, like, to find, to some extent, like, I think in any college audition, like, they typically do say, like, okay, dance is the thing we put at a lower priority. Like, we know we can teach you that a little bit more objectively than something like acting or singing. Like, that takes longer to get you where we need you to be. So I knew that was going to be there to some extent. But, like, yeah, so, like, for doing pre-screen, because I know a lot of schools you had to send in the pre-screen video, and they would say, submit a 1-minute piece of choreography. So I was like, okay, well, I can't do that. So my mom, she put me in private ballet lessons for, like, a couple months. For once a week, I would work with this one woman. I think her name was Karen Connor. Yeah. And so, like every Monday night for, like, a couple months, she just gave me, like, basic ballet, right? Just basic, okay, okay, this is what because, like, these are the terms you're going to need to know at these auditions. They're not going to say bend, they're going to say plie. So just make sure, just knowing I knew the words. And, like, a little, like, crash course, okay, we're going to do ballet for, like, a couple of weeks. Then we'll do tap briefly. Then we'll do jazz. And at the end, we'll come up with, like, a minute jazz choreography. And you'll submit that to schools. And it was rough, right? But, like, that was, I guess, my first, like, formal dance training. And even so, it was a very, informal space of, okay, it was a private dance lesson where it was just me and this woman, giving cheap lessons for an hour. But, like, and I think every school I sent that pre-screen video to of me dancing, like, they all turned me down. Like, I was just, I knew I'm not a dancer, and that's fine. So then when it came to that
you got into a program that is much more focused on the acting and the singing anyways.
Well, here's the thing. So, like, NYU was my first audition. In-person audition, and then I remember, so I did the singing and acting call, and I was like, all right, this is great. After the acting call, like, they always do, like, a little interview with you. And I was like, all right, I know I'm going to say the right things. Like, I know this is going to be a good time. But then there was the dance section, which was I had last, and it was terrifying. Like, I was mortified having to do it. And I remember there was a moment where they said, okay, for 16 counts, freestyle.
Yeah,
I didn't know what to do. I flossed. Like, I literally just started flossing, and then I did a step touch, and I was like, all right, that's my 16 counts, just to have something there. And because I knew, I was like, this is just something I don't have. And I think the woman who was leading the dance call, like, she knew, okay, this kid's not a dancer, but at least he has spirit, right? Like, at least he's trying to get through it. He didn't just give up. He didn't break down crying. So I think that's what I had. Like, I remember everyone else when they were doing their, 16 counts of freestyle, like, they're doing, like, contortions and all this, like, crazy, like, abstract work. And I was like, all right, I can't do that, and that's fine. Ideally, I'm going to learn that in college if I hope to God, get in. Yeah, and then I didn't have any more dance auditions, because I think Carnegie Mellon, they didn't require us to dance. They just made us sing and act. So I was like, okay, yeah, so some schools clearly don't even value dance that much. And, like, I knew, like, some schools, like, Point Park, like, I heard is, dance heavy. So I was like, all right, but these are... so for me, it was a thing, I'm like, all right, I'll learn it in college. It's going to be a thing I have to do, whether I want to or not. Even though in my career, I don't plan on doing, a chorus line or anything like that. Like, it's something I have to learn. Like, fine. And then, so when I got to college is when I finally properly got some dance training. And honestly, I found NYU's, like, dancing to be a lot heavier than I expected. I thought it was going to be, way less than what it was, which has honestly been great because it really put me outside of my comfort zone, So for listeners, so our freshman year we had ballet twice a week, and then we had contemporary dance. And ballet, that was my first time doing ballet, and I remember the first semester we didn't really even do much ballet. Like, he just made us do yoga.
Yeah, that was really fun.
Yeah, I honestly, like, I felt really comfortable and safe doing that, because, like, all right, I'm not doing anything. Like, I remember the first time he said, like, all right, everyone get up and go to the bars. I was terrified. I was like, this is scary. Like, but then, like, it ended up being very, the one thing I liked about ballet, it was very simple and very mathematical.
Yeah.
And, I say that a lot, where the reason I think I get along with it is because there is just some amount an objectively right way to do ballet. It is, a plie is a plie, a tendu is a tendu. There's going to be a very specific way of doing it versus, when contemporary dance, like, I remember I used to struggle so much in that class because not only could I just not move my muscles and my body in that way, but I don't know, it just felt really, really out there. And I really struggled with that. I really, really did. And, the Professor Byron, he knew that. The TAs knew that. And they were very supportive. And, I think they took into account of, like, all right, this kid's not a dancer, but at least he's trying. He's giving it his all. And, I remember I would go to, like, every, like, after school, like, they would have, like, the tutorial sessions. To really work on it. Like, I would go to all of that. But, yeah, I would say college was my first real dance training. And then sophomore year, that's when they go crazy and, you have, like, 4 different dance classes. That was crazy. But it taught me a lot. And I think that's when I learned to just let go. I learned that, hey, don't, and it also being on Zoom helped where, like, okay, nobody's looking at me anymore. Like, I don't stand out as much. Only the professor's really going to notice. And that's fine. And, yeah, just let go. Just learn it. I was also starting to get a little bit better just now at that point. I've danced for a year. Especially with ballet, like, I really found myself actually enjoying ballet. And I enjoyed the muscularity of it a lot. And the mathematicalness. And then also when it got to the point where they started saying, okay, you guys now can do a tendu. Now make that tendu your own. They started getting to that point. You live that fantasy a little bit. I enjoyed that. I think that's when it started clicking. I could act it a little bit more. It felt like, okay, this is the place where I'm like, it felt like math and acting coming together. And that's what ballet became for me. But then other styles, like we had to do hip hop. That was very, foreign and different, and I don't know, I enjoyed it because I love hip hop, I love the music, I love the culture, and, I make music, so, I think I was excited to learn how to physicalize the music I anyways make. That was a really cool experience.
Yeah.
With tap was cool just because it had that sense of, okay, it was like, if ballet was algebra, then, tap felt like calculus, where, like, okay, you know how to point your foot now, but now can you point your foot and make a very specific sound and do it in a really cool way? That I kind of enjoyed, and it was challenging, but, like, I felt like, okay, it was accessible. What else do we have to take? Then we had jazz. Jazz, that year, I really started enjoying it. Just the choreography was a lot more fun, and I think also it was a lot more... There was some amount of freedom and personality in it, which I was starting to learn to put... I was learning to put myself into the dance a little bit more. And then with tango, same idea. We're like, okay, I know I look horrible doing this, but there was this... The professor, made sure that there was some amount of specificity in it, and then you just add in the acting, and I think that really carried it.
Yeah, and I think that the professors we had, as you say, they were very good at making each art form accessible. Because certainly the way I learned dance in elementary school, middle school, high school was kind of like moves first, everything else second. And it wasn't like everything else second because that's how the teachers, prized it. But like maybe like the idea of technique and like personality went in one ear out the other. And I just was so focused on the steps.
The high school and middle school version of musical theater, at least, I didn't go to a performing arts high school or anything, right? I went to normalized public school, right? So I think in that type of setting, where these are not necessarily the best people. These are not people who have actually worked in the industry, right? These are just, the professor has an English degree, so she's going to be, or the teacher had an English degree, so she's going to be the theater director. Like, it is what it is. And I think in that space, like, the dance necessarily wasn't acting. It wasn't combined, right? These are moves for the sake of moves. When we did it in the Heights, it wasn't like, all right, the reason you're going to do this move is because it furthers what's being said in the song any further or, like, express it. It's purely like, no, these are vaguely Latino moves, so do them. Or, in Under the Sea of, okay, these moves seem calypso, so you're going to do them, but it doesn't necessarily further the idea of, hey, Under the Sea is the best place to be. And that was never stressed also, right? They would say, okay, do the moves and smile because you're having fun. Or they would just say, have fun. But, like, it wouldn't be the thing of, like, hey, you're really trying to make a point here. If I knew, in freshman year of high school when I was doing that dance of the reason I'm doing this dance is to make a point to Ariel, like, hey, this is the place to be, and just go with it, I think I would have done so much better. But that wasn't what was stressed on to me. It was stressed on to me, hey, do these moves properly. Otherwise, you're going to stand out and look bad. Simple as that.
Yeah.
Everyone has to be uniform.
The main goal was look good.
Yeah.
And in college, obviously they want you to look good because they want to teach you to look good for the future. When, like, yes, looking good is important in a getting job sense. But, like, number one, these college professors are saying if you don't look great, but you, as you're saying, you tell the story, you convince Ariel, then, like, boom, you did your job. And even thinking about high school, my, like, teacher, she, was, like, I was in a class with a lot of girls who took ballet and, like, outside and took dance classes, like, 5 hours a day. And there was a time when I took, like, 9 hours of dance per week, but that was in middle school. And so in middle school, I wasn't, fully aware of technique and not absorbing technique in. And so then in high school, my teacher was like, where's your technique? Use your technique. And I was like, what technique? I know how to do moves and, like, be energetic.
Yeah, so for us, we were at a point where, technique wasn't even a word that would have been used in my middle school and my high school. Right?
Yeah.
Like, it was purely, okay, you're dancing just because you need to dance in musical theater. Like, that's the vibe. Like, which is fine, but it's not proper. Like, fine, the shows looked good, but it was a very aesthetic thing. And that's the reason I always associated dance with looks. Which is something I really, and also it's just me as a person. I have a lot of insecurity about, how I carry myself, how I look. So that was, like, a very terrifying thing, that everything I'm doing is based on an aesthetic. And then when I got to college, it was, well, look, the aesthetic comes second because it happens naturally from that technique or, just doing things in the proper way, really muscularizing it, feeling. And also I learned, well, how to make that, if I do need to go aesthetic, how to make that aesthetic happen. When I'm doing port de bras in ballet, to make it look a certain way, just imagine that beach ball, right? Things like that, like, it works.
Yeah.
And I think that was the perfect blend for me of, okay, I can look good and also feel good and do it well. But then I do think, I'll still look back at my dance videos like, all right, I look horrible doing it. But in the moment, at least, I felt like I was doing it right, though, right? So I think that clicked well for me. And then I would say my relationship with dance really, really changed, actually, over this last summer, where, so I had a cousin's wedding, my cousin got married, and, again, for a big Indian wedding, like, there's a lot of dancing. Like, I think I was in, like, over the course of, and it was, like, a week of festivities, and it was insane, and over the course of the week, so I was in, like, 8 different dance numbers. I had to choreograph a couple of them. Like, it was a lot, and it was awesome, though, because, like, that was the first time where I said, well, look, first and first, none of us are dancers per se. I mean, I'm sure they might have taken Bollywood dance classes or whatever, but like, no,
Yeah.
the most of any of us have danced like, okay, in college, like at the club. And for me, I never even did that. Like, when I go to a party, I'm not the guy dancing. I'm the guy sitting on the couch trying to talk. Like,
Yeah.
but then that was the first time I was saying, well, let me embrace that party side of it a little bit more. And I think honestly, over the summer was the first time I genuinely learned to love dancing. Like,
Yeah.
just doing those choreographed dance moves with, my cousins and family. And then later on for every Indian wedding, every function, there's a dance floor and everyone goes crazy. And just partying and feeling it and loving it. Like, I remember after every night of dancing, like, everyone would come to me and say, Manav, you're such a good dancer. I'm like, sure, like, I've never heard that in my entire life. And I think it purely was a thing of like, oh, I don't need to dance for the sake of how it looks, it is how it feels. And when I did
Yeah.
it over the summer, it was the case of I was truly doing it not because I felt like I had to do it a certain way. I wasn't doing any character, I wasn't doing anything but feeling good and just celebrating. And now, like, I generally say it, like, when I go to a party, I dance now. Like, even if no one else is dancing, I'm sitting there just vibing. Even if it's not good, even if it's just bopping my shoulders, like, I'm now the guy doing that, And, like, I've been going to, these, like, Bollywood dance parties now, and, like, yes, I'm not the best dancer there because I'm not on the male dance team or anything like that, but I'm still gonna vibe, I'm still gonna hop, I'm still gonna jump around because it feels good. And now I think, I mean, this year I haven't had to take any dance classes with my current training, but I generally think
Yeah.
next time someone puts me into a dance call, fine, I'm gonna struggle with learning the choreography because that'll always be the case,
Yeah.
but at least I now understand that sensation of just doing it because it feels good.
Yeah, yeah. And dance is like such a crazy thing, and especially for performers, because dance has been around since, literally the dawn of time. And there are so many different cultures and moves and ways to move and definitions of dance and music and ways of counting, but certainly as like a performer, and specifically a performer in America, we obviously get caught up in the forms that are most like visible to us, the ballet, the tap, the jazz, and it's easy to be all like, oh man, like ballet is so hard, and I don't know this, and oh, my technique is lacking in this area, I'm just not a good dancer, when like dance is just inherent to everyone in its own way.
Oh, absolutely. And I think when we just take hip hop, I was really stressed out in that class because I really wanted to be good at hip hop. And all
Yeah.
said and done, I wasn't. Like, I really did
Yeah,
struggle with
neither
the
was
moves.
I.
It was rough, and I don't know, because there is a certain way you just have to have, I think, grown up to really know how to carry yourself. That, or you take 10 years of practice and you just somehow teach
Yeah.
it to yourself.
It's the
But
poise again. It's the poise. I
It
don't
is.
have
It's a
the
poise
ballet
thing.
poise, nor do I have the hip hop poise.
But I think, like, in my version of the hip hop voice that I can carry myself in, like, it didn't necessarily translate perfectly into, okay, we're going to Dougie now. Like, no, it didn't work. But
Yeah.
I think there was a time where, like, when I was, like, recording the videos to submit for class, like, they felt good. They felt like I was doing the right thing. Fine, looking back, they looked horrible, but, like, it is a feel thing. And I think going forward, like, I think with any dance training, if I ever have any more going forth, or any dancing really I do going forth, it has to be feel-based, because I think
Yeah.
that's where the technique really shines, if technique is really going to be a thing, is just, well, what feel. And I think, when these forms are being created, it's not like they're thinking, okay, what's the most technical version of doing that, right? When they invented the tendu, I don't think the guy was thinking really hard about, like, okay, well, you have to put your muscle in this way and really put the weight on these toes, right? That wasn't
Yeah.
that wasn't really a thing. I think
Yeah.
later on they figured that out, but I think the conception of these dances is a thing of, no, it's it makes you feel a certain way. Ballet makes you, the reason I really enjoyed ballet this past year was because find the technique had that mathematical quality to it, but then when I was doing it, like, it just made me feel a certain way. Stretching my arms out just a little extra further made me feel a certain way, which I really related to, as opposed to, more contemporary styles or jazz styles where, like, I don't know, I understand a lot of it was, okay, make yourself feel, but like, the professor would talk about the jazz aesthetic.
Yeah.
And that used to mess me up, right? Oh man, there's an aesthetic I have to follow. Now I can't do it.
Yeah.
So I think that's what it is, really, is aesthetic versus feeling.
Yeah, yeah. And definitely when I've been doing a lot of thinking recently about like my future in like performing, and specifically like performing musicals and like dancing, cuz like as I kind of said, I've been dancing for like most of my life, and there are times when I really enjoy dance, but times when I really don't enjoy dance, and times when it's difficult and not worth it and frustrating. But then there's of course times when like I really feel it and I let loose, and those are the times I enjoy it the most. And so when I think about like, okay, so how do I want to interact with like dance in the future? Like maybe sure, I adore Cats. Everyone knows this about me. I adore Cats the musical. But that's like so much ballet training just for Cats that honestly I don't think I'd want to apply to other places. However, like, oh God, what's an example? I don't know, just like a lot of the like musical theater dancing I did in high school that like, required some technique and like was like rigorous but like in a fun way. Like that's where I flourished the most and enjoyed the most. And so yeah, I trying to find the balance of like, okay, you don't have to like, beat yourself up if you don't look like, XYZ famous dancer, just do it in the way you like it. And, even if, and that's, I think, another thing about like Cats, for example, is like, yes, you can go into a musical theater department, having never done dance before, and the faculty could try to teach you how to do, dances for Cats, but the reality is that a lot of those people who actually get into Cats are going to be dance majors or like professional ballerinas. And so you just like kind of wind up doing the type of dance that's meant for you.
Exactly. And for me, I think, the roles anyways I'm attracted to have never been dance heavy roles. And I think that's just naturally because it doesn't speak to me, and I know that's fine. I'd rather do a Les Mis than a chorus line, no questions asked. Because that's just what speaks to me. And then, fine, if I really do need to dance, then like, fine, I see myself doing then something like a Hamilton or something like that. I don't see myself doing Cats or, I don't know. I think naturally we just know ourselves, right? We know when to put ourselves in certain situations. Yeah. And it was a thing of like, in high school when we were doing these different shows, like obviously I know I'm not going to put myself in a place where I'm not enjoying it because I know I'm going to have to dance a lot or anything. Like even when I did Shrek the musical, like, fine, as Shrek I did have to dance and I had to be goofy with it, but I knew like, what? I get to be goofy with it because that's the role. It works out. I put myself in the right place for that. Versus, fine, if I wanted to do, in the Heights, yes, it did make sense that they didn't put me in the club scene because I wouldn't have made sense there. And that's okay. And I think that's the reason I've really made peace with it, it not getting to dance at all in high school, was because it wasn't necessarily always going to be the right place for me, and that's fine. And even now, if, the next place tells me, hey, Maanav, we need you in, I don't know, what's a dance musical? Newsies, right?
Yeah.
Well, I knew, fine, if I'm going to do Newsies, I'm not going to be the person doing backflips. Like, okay, I'll make sure I'm either in a role that's not a dance-heavy role, like, like Davy or Jack or something, or know that, hey, it's okay if I don't do this one because it'll make me not feel good. And why life's too short to just do things that don't make you feel good.
Yeah. It's funny that you mention playing Shrek, because I just realized that you are the second guest on this podcast who have played Shrek.
No way.
Yes, indeed. Two episodes ago, Adam Hilt played Shrek in our middle school production of Shrek the Musical. So
No way, that's awesome. All right, well, that's a trend you got to keep up.
I know. Gotta find all Shreks now.
All Shreks.
So, what do you think of this idea? It's interesting that, like, ballet, we talk about ballet, and it's, mainly, like, female, like, performer-based. What do you think of, like, tap and hip-hop, where the most famous dancers for those are actually men? Like Gregory Hines, Bill Robinson, Fred Astaire.
I think naturally those styles anyways come from very male-dominated scenes, which we did see also with ballet, but I think ballet also because of its history of, of sexual power and sex work and all that, it led to it becoming a very female-oriented art. But with hip-hop and tap, they're very street dances, right? I mean, tap comes from, a history of, bar dances where you just stomp your feet on the ground and, square dances and things like that. It's very community-based. And same with hip-hop, which is a very community thing of, like, all right, we're just, we're on the streets right now. Let's just go ahead. Let's break dance for a little bit. Let's, just bop out to whatever, And I think, and a lot of it comes from house party culture and things like that. So I do think then that ties, I think, to, again, this idea of, like, all right, well, there's that male poise, that male groundedness that's trying to be conveyed through these arts. And I think that's the reason they've gone on to be very male-dominated. I think tap, also it being very European-centric, has inherently kind of fit into this. It's allowed itself to stay in this idea of, okay, it's attached to bar culture and, going to the pub and then, drinking and then what's that one dance where so it's like tap where like they like stomp at the ground. There was that one insurance commercial about it.
I know what you're talking about, but I can't think of the name. Is it like, I know
Clogging.
What you're thinking of.
Clogging,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
Clogging. Right, so like these are very community things, they're social, but yeah, they are also, indicative of the classic European male-led society. I think hip-hop is a little less like that, and you'll see, I think in this region right now, a lot of hip-hop is dominated by women these days, more than it was. I think it was, again, created, most of these dance styles, yes, were created by men, but a lot of the innovation has come from women. I think tap is very much, it is to some extent a dying dance form.
Yeah.
Just because, right, it is. And I think that's because there's also accessibility barriers. It has lowered in popularity. The only time you really see it now is in musical theater, where it's the one tap number, right? Even like, find Newsies has the one tap number. It's not a tap show, right? You just don't find tap shows as much as you used to anymore.
Yeah.
So I think, where tap does continue to exist is in its old world European roots. But with hip hop, it is changing so much, and you'll find a lot of moves are being created by men. But, especially again in this age of TikTok, like you'll find it is very diverse in who's coming up with the moves that stick around. Not to say that TikTok dances are necessarily hip hop, but the ones that I think that reach such a high level of popularity, a lot of them do come from both black men and women, right? It's a very leveled playing field in that regard. But yeah, I think it's always going to be history, the reason that these things are male dominated to some extent. But yeah, all the best innovation comes from the women that pick it up and make it something. I mean, so much of hip hop dance now, I can only associate with women. The men they might have created it, they might have done whatever, but no, it's the women that have totally changed it into such a powerful form that's also really transferable in a lot of different ways.
Yeah. So now this brings us to a very important segment of the show called Convince Chad.
All right.
So imagine this. You're walking through Tisch and you see a giant poster advertising the dance department's new ballet recital. Ooh.
Ooh.
And coming up behind you is this tour group, because they're literally everywhere nowadays, and they freak me out.
Yeah.
I'm like, ugh. But so in this tour group is this dude in high school and his mom. And his mom sees the sign and is like, ooh, honey, I'd love to see the ballet recital. I bet the Tisch students are so talented. And the son's like, nah, Mom, that's lame. That stuff's for girls. You're enraged. You stop in your tracks and you say, listen, bro, you couldn't be more wrong. And now, in Chad's language, you must explain why ballet is for all to see and do.
I got you. I mean, look, bro, like, fine, I know you got this conception of, like, what ballet is. Like, fine, we all had that, right? Okay, pink tights, like, it is what it is. But it is so much more than that, man. Like, it's a sport. Like, it's muscular. There's a lot of power in it. It's something that you'll never see anything the same way again after you go to that ballet recital. It'll change you, bro. And I mean, like, come on, we all love art, right? Ballet's just another art, right? And ballet is the reason we have the art we have today. And you know, the same way you're trying to take a girl to Met, bro, take your girl to the recital, take your mom to the recital, bro. She'll love you for that. I promise you. Be there. I'll see you tonight.
I think Chad is convinced.
I'm glad to hear it.
Well, Maanav, thank you for being an excellent guest on the podcast.
No, thank you. This has been really good. Really enlightening. Like, I feel like I've learned so much about myself.
Yeah. It was a good conversation. It's always fun to do these and just, like, you don't know what people are going to say. And, yeah, good times. Well, to all the listeners, I'll see you soon.